Can I get a thumbs up from maybe Joe Uhas there? Can you hear me? Okay, I got my thumbs up from Joe. That means we have quorum and we can go ahead and move forward. My name is Ed Hermes. I'm the chair of the Vision Zero Street Safety Committee. It's great to see everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. First on the agenda, as part of the call to the order, we have a few new faces here in the committee. Want to welcome some of our new members. We have at least 2 new members here today, student members. Just want to give folks an opportunity to say hello and introduce themselves a little bit. Colin, I'll start with you.
Hello.
You want to hit the button?
Hello, my name is Cullen. I'm a student at ASU. I'm a junior in the architecture program, and I work at a local engineering firm called Finley Ward in their ADOC roadway section.
Wonderful. And Lavender, you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Lavender. I am a senior at Camelback High School.
Wonderful. It's great to have both of you. You guys will be on the roads a lot longer than some of us other folks on the committee, and we really appreciate your input. Appreciate you being a part of this committee. Is there anyone else online who's new? I don't think so. Okay, moving on. Approval of the minutes from the June 20th, 2024 meeting. Is there any discussion or questions regarding the minutes from our last meeting? If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
Second motion.
Okay, Julian has motioned. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Julian and seconded by Jamie. All in favor of approving the minutes of our last meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, it does pass. Next, we'll move on to our director's update. Director Brown, good to see you.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome, the committee members. I have a brief update, and I also want to welcome the 2 new student members, Colin and Lavender. Welcome aboard. I'm trying to fill out our student members, so I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Automated enforcement, I know there was a desire to report out on automated enforcement. We will be doing that in October. That's the plan. We're still working on a few details and expect to have some direction with that shortly, working with the council and the mayor's office as well. Micromobility age, we appreciate the input. Also, we'll be going to council this fall with a recommendation on the age, and appreciate the council advising us, the committee advising us on 12-year-old was a recommendation. So we have taken that, sharing that internally in the city, and expect to have something shortly this fall with a recommendation on how to go forward.
Any questions for the director as part of the director's update? Director Brown, just have a couple. You mentioned the October meeting, and one of the issues and items that keeps getting brought up here in this meeting is leading pedestrian intervals. And was mentioned was a NAU, I think it was NAU study. Will that be kind of ready for prime time at the October meeting, do you think?
Yeah, I'd ask our staff to give us an update if they're going to be ready. We've talked about leading pedestrian indicators and perhaps doing a pilot and expanding on that.
Yeah. So the NAU study is kind of wrapping up. We think it likely will be ready. We can't say for sure at this point in time.
Okay. We'll work together on the agenda as we always do. I was curious, I know other people I'm sure are curious out there. Just another question as part of your update. We looked at 27th Avenue not too long ago, really a deep dive in that. Where are things at with the recommended improvements to 27th Avenue, that safety corridor?
So, as I recall, one of the recommendations was moving some of the sidewalk work up. It was also a recommendation that I had to staff at the same time. So we are looking at that ability to move some, separate out portions of the project and do some safety improvements, especially on the sidewalk. That's something we continue to look at internally to try to divert more funds to sidewalks in general. So I don't have an update beyond that, but it's something that I charge staff with identifying ways of separating that work out and doing it earlier.
Great. And we don't have to be an agenda item in the future, but I'm sure the committee, probably about a year ago, selected that segment as one of the ones to focus on. So just if you could kind of continue to keep us updated on the improvements there, because that was one that this committee voted on. And and thought was especially dangerous and egregious with wanting those improvements. So it doesn't have to be, it could be other forms of, you know, it doesn't have to take up a whole slot on the agenda, but would appreciate an update when you have one. Okay, hearing no other questions, we'll move on from director's updates to the approval of the revised 2024 meeting schedule. You should have, as part of this packet, committee members received a dates for the remainder of the year for 2024. We want to make sure that this is accessible to our members as well as to the public. You can see on the email the remaining dates, it looks like, are October 23rd and December 11th of 2024. We meet every other month. Any issues with those dates? Okay.
I think just clarifying, where are we looking at being at city council in the future or at other locations?
Good question.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, well, here, Mr. Chair, who, is that Joe?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Joe.
if you don't mind, I'd like to interrupt here because I think this has bearing on the location.
Go ahead.
I'm not there tonight, Ed, because I have COVID. But I got to tell you, this is the first time I'm online and the sound quality is not good. I can hear you pretty good. I can hear the director almost as well, but
Thanks.
other discussion, anyone else talking so far, it was really difficult. If we're going to have, you know, a significant number of attendees, both committee members and the public online, I think we need to meet in a location that has an adequate sound capability. So I just hope that has some bearing on selecting the location.
I can try stuff.
I would completely agree with Joe.
Yeah, thanks. That sounds like that was Dan. And as you can see, I really get close to the microphone here.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're really good. And Ed, of course, is an attorney, so he can always be heard. But I'm just concerned that as the meeting, I was going to bring it up at the end because what are you going to do about it now? But all I'm saying is, since you're talking about meeting locations, I would hope that this gives, you know, that is some consideration.
So Laura and maybe Brianna, maybe you guys have some insight. Future meetings, like our October meeting and our December meeting, will the council chamber be available? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sounds like I'm getting, for those online, I'm getting both a yes and a head nod from Laura that we'll be back in the council chambers. I think they were doing some work, maybe some IT work or something like that, but the plan is going forward to be back in the council chambers. And for you students who are new to it, it's pretty fun sitting up there at the council chambers, you know? So Joe, hopefully the sound quality will be better.
And Chair Hermes, if I could just add to that, Thursdays are no longer available there for us. That's part of what we've been dealing with. So we're looking at Wednesdays. Some Wednesdays in the future will have conflict with council meetings, so we may have to dance around that a little bit. But we're looking at Wednesdays in the future, and we just may have to be a little flexible on which week we go.
Okay, that's fair.
And back in council, so hopefully the sound issue will be dealt with.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, this is an action item for the 2024 meeting schedule. I didn't hear any objections, so I'll take a motion to approve this 2024 meeting schedule.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, it does pass. Okay, next is the 2025 meeting schedule. Discussion and possible action. I don't have the dates. I'm not sure. Maybe I just don't have them for 2025, but it sounds like those are going to be on a Wednesday in, thank you, February 19th, 2025, April 16th, June 18th, August 20th, October 15th, December 17th. There may have to be some flexibility, I'm hearing, on a Wednesday. We'll know in advance of that for folks, but this will be the plan unless council gives us the boot. We haven't tried a new date. Any concerns or discussion about those 2025 dates?
Did you say June 18th? That might be a holiday.
June 18th, not 19th.
Oh, 19th, okay.
Yeah. Juneteenth is a holiday. Yep. This is June 18th. Okay, hearing none, I'll take a motion to approve the 2025 meetings.
Motion to approve.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it does pass. Thank you so much. Look forward to a lot of but good meetings and a lot of good work we have to do. Next is our, the red light running study. Alyssa Ryan from the University of Arizona. I won't hold that against you.
I knew I would get that here.
Yes.
Can everyone here online hear me okay?
Yes,
Best so far, the best so far.
Wow,
Dr.
I got lucky. Okay, sorry for the lot for the folks in the room. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr.
You're used to providing those lectures in a classroom.
Oh,
Clearly.
gosh.
This is great.
Yes,
Okay.
I gotta yell there to get the students to wake up in the morning. So I'm Dr. Alyssa Ryan. I'm an assistant professor of civil engineering at the University of Arizona. It's great to be here and talk about the red light running camera study I did and with my team researching the red light running camera program funded by the City of Phoenix this past year. We wrapped up that project in May. So today I'm going to be talking about kind of what the purpose of that study was and what the conclusions were and potential next steps that I found from the study with my team. I assume I have to point. It's not on. Now it's on. We're good. So the objectives of the project, just going to list them here, was to provide recommendations to the City of Phoenix regarding the use of red light running cameras to improve safety at intersections. So if you were unfamiliar, City of Phoenix had a red light running camera program in the past. I'll be going over some of that history today. Analyze the effectiveness of red light running cameras in different regions with similar Vision Zero goals, so other cities that also have Vision Zero goals, to evaluate whether previous red light running camera locations in Phoenix, just to determine if they're successful at reducing crashes. In other words, do they work at creating a safer environment? And then outline specific measures and steps that the city could take to enhance safety using cameras and other automated enforcement activities. I'll be going into that a bit. So this graphic here shows you the cities with similar Vision Zero goals, in the addition of Indianapolis, that are also major cities in the United States, in their current situation regarding red light running cameras, if they have them or they do not have them. So just a quick overview, you can see a lot of these programs, they maybe used to have them, but they were shut down. And some have like specific regions within a city that have them operating, and others have many operating, like in New York City and Chicago. So this is just a brief history to show you that, yes, a lot of other cities with similar Vision Zero goals as City of Phoenix have red light running cameras. Another thing we looked into with red light running cameras was the fee structure on your license. So if you run a red light and you are caught on camera, how does that impact on points on your license? As you can see here, some cities do have points, some do not. And then all of them had fees associated with it, ranging in different values. So something to consider at the end of the day, if a program were put in place, where else are these programs across the country? So a bit of background to the red light running photo enforcement program in the City of Phoenix. So from 1995 to 1997, the city obtained federal highway funds for a red light running campaign. And it sparked discussions on camera use for that and enforcement and in general public education. Some concerns were raised at the same time. So what does the cost look like? Legislation and reduced police citizen interaction during violations. So for those unfamiliar, maybe the public, red light running cameras are those that are able to automatically detect if someone has run a red light at an intersection. That way, in a situation, enforcement ticket can be handed out to that person directly. It's not exactly how it works in Arizona, but similar to that. Later, council studied photo enforcement impact in Valley cities. So an initial request for proposals for red light running camera programs faced legal issues due to a vendor's contract issues. So they reissued the RFP soon after, selected a vendor, but then negotiations were paused. So this is taking some time to get this in place, but it eventually did start at 10 intersections in the early 2000s and expanded to then include photo radar at school zones for safer driving near schools. So this happened around the same time. Discussions then continued later in the early 2000s, which covered vendor practices, state laws, installation challenges, and revenue loss. Council then shifted pavement based on citations, and they chose a new vendor, Redflex, to address these financial concerns that arose. And Redflex worked with the City of Phoenix for a long time. Later, the council considered extending the program past those 10 intersections due to observed safety improvements, such as reduced crash rates. But then the program was temporarily suspended due to state law requiring vendor licenses. And then eventually in 2019, the request to expand the program to over 12 intersections sparked more discussion. There's a lot of debate regarding the locations and how these cameras are in place. And eventually it was decided that they should be taken out. And so they were in 2020. And so after that, these conversations have continued in many different ways across the state, not just here in Phoenix. But as you can tell, this is certainly still of interest to the city of Phoenix and the greater state of Arizona to continue this conversation. Hence why I'm talking to you today about it. So to begin, we did a survey instead of interviews to kind of understand what do transportation professionals who experience this transportation red light running camera program, how did they think of the program? What did they think of successes and challenges with it? So we had a 25-question survey that took about 5 to 10 minutes to respond to, and Qualtrics sent out by us at the University of Arizona. We had a lot of responses, I believe over 30 to 35 responses of transportation professionals throughout the greater Phoenix region. And these are our results. So they found in terms of red light running and speeding problems in the valley, which we asked them about, the primary cause they believed was a conscious decision and speeding. That's why it happens. They thought it was due to aggressive driving, distracted and impaired driving, and due to lacking optimal enforcement. In terms of their perspectives on the red light running camera program and how safety works with red light running cameras, they thought red light running camera was a major problem at the specific intersections where red light running cameras were put in place. And there were some mixed opinions after deactivation of the program. In terms of impact on crashes, everyone agreed that red light running related crashes are a concern and they lead to injuries and fatalities. And they also noted that driver behavior does change due to red light running cameras. This aligns with previous research as well. It is known that citations are effective tools at changing driver behavior. So some other benefits, they thought that red light running cameras could positively influence driver behavior and improve safety. So once we understood all of those surveys, we also chatted with some folks in different regions on their automated enforcement programs. We gathered data for a crash analysis. And this is to understand how effective are red light running cameras when they were red light running cameras when they were in place. So we were able to collect this data from Redflex directly. Wasn't fully comprehensive, but gave us enough of the location data and some of the citation records. Then we had intersection traffic count data, ADT, from Arizona Department of Transportation, and crash data from the Arizona Crash Information System, which has all the crash data in the state. They house that there. And we used ArcGIS and R, which are coding and mapping softwares, to analyze this data. This map shows us where the red light running cameras were located during different years, as well as the directions of those cameras. You should all have access to the final report from this project if you'd like to dive into this graphic in a bit more detail, but as you can see, they were placed all throughout the region of Phoenix. To study the effectiveness of these cameras, we did a specific analysis method where we had to pull from locations that did not have red light running cameras in place at the same time, but that were similar to the locations that did have the cameras. And then we were able to do our empirical Bayes analysis, which provides us with a before and after type of analysis. So why did we partition the data into these different categories? So we had before the cameras were in place, and then during the time they were in place, which is a period of 3 years for each of those. And then we had a during and after the camera was taken out, because the cameras did move. Some of the cameras moved a few times during this almost 20-year period that were in place. So each category, we did a separate analysis. And then for the during and after, we only did the 3 years of data after the ban of red light running cameras. So those were only the camera locations that were in place in 2019. So 2015 through the end. So this is what the main takeaway that is most interesting, I think, are the conclusions of this robust analysis, which are that property damage crashes decreased by around 8% during red light running camera operation. In terms of fatal and injury crashes, they decreased by almost 29% during their operation. And angle crashes in particular decreased by around 12%, with a 31-ish% reduction in property damage crashes and fatal and severe injury crashes. These results aren't very surprising from previous research.
Oh, Alyssa, we have a
Yes.
question.
Absolutely.
Alyssa, can I assume this is in the direction of the camera only, not the total intersection, or is it the total intersection?
So it's not in terms of the volume and the direction. We weren't able to get down to the direction level because we didn't quite know what the volumes were at any given direction. So it's at the intersection level.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. In terms of conclusions, again, our impact after the termination of red light running cameras were taken out because we know they were banned and they were all taken out. The angle crashes continued to decrease after the red light running cameras were terminated. We're not quite sure why. No significant impact overall on left turn crashes, but did see a little bit of an increase in those. Severity of left turn crashes still decreased when they were taken out, but we did see an increase in property damage, no injury crashes, left turn for left turns by 8% when they were taken out. And this is, again, is consistent with previous studies that, you know, when you take out a red light camera, it's not automatically that you're going to see this big increase in a short period of time because they've been there for so long. So this reduction in crashes makes sense still. In terms of recommended next steps, so maybe some further analysis in identifying factors contributing to some locations not benefiting from red light running camera operations. Not every single location saw a decrease. We're not sure why some didn't and most did, but maybe that's something to look into. Maybe they aren't the best for every location, solution-wise, at increasing safety. We don't know the duration of the impact of the red light running program at specific locations. We weren't able to understand a full need of like staff. So if you were to run a red light running camera program, you need enforcement staff. When you put a enforcement ticket out that's automatic from that camera, you still need like police to review that and send out the ticket. It cannot be automatic in the state of Arizona due to our laws. So that requires a lot of staff. Upon speaking with other cities in the area, that's their biggest challenge. And then the public certainly is to be heard and understood in this process to make sure that they want this and that they know they want it for the benefit of their region and city. And then lastly, the timing of the red light running camera violations. So we have these things called dilemma zones. I think some of us are familiar with those here, but just to make sure that the timing of the camera is correct, where you don't end up with people who enter the intersection at a time that was acceptable, but they still got a ticket due to this timing issue. With that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman?
I heard, I'm gonna go first with Abby, and then somebody, whoever said Mr. Chairman after that, someone online probably.
Yeah, I'm just gonna start with what is the goal with this? Like, what are we going to do this? Is council expecting us to bring the red light cameras back? Are we discussing bringing red light cameras back right now? Is that what this is for, the study?
I can answer that one. So we reached out to U of A to really determine, we had red light running cameras in Phoenix and we wanted to know what was the benefit of them. Did they help? Did they hurt? Kind of from an academic perspective, say, what did they do here in Phoenix specifically? And that was really the goal behind it.
And I had a question online. Go ahead. Joe, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, Doctor, thank you very much. I've got several questions. I think, Mr. Chairman, what I'll do is I'll ask a couple and then I'll yield and then you can come back to me. Doctor, you know, you've done this work in other communities too, so I know your report was Phoenix specific, but I have a couple questions about sort of how we stack up to other communities. I am of the belief that this issue's become highly political, and frankly, the vendors are largely responsible for that too. You indicated that there was a vendor conduct issue. Can you tell us, because some of us may not be familiar with it, I just recall a little bit about what happened, but can you inform the committee what actually took place?
I apologize, I actually don't quite know. Does anyone from the city perhaps know?
I don't know.
I don't know about any issues with the city of Phoenix. I know there was an issue, I can't remember whether it was Chicago or some other city involving one of the vendors that was, do you recall which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, in Chicago specifically, they had a political issue that centered around, I believe a public figure stated that that they were getting money from this red light running camera program. that was
Mr.
funded.
Chairman, you know what? If we don't know the answer to that, that's okay. I'd rather not, we'll only open ourselves up to legal implications if we report something that wasn't accurate. So I'm good with that.
Did you
I
have
just
another
want to
question,
point out
Joe?
that, I'm sorry.
Did you have another question besides that?
Yeah, I do. It's just that I do want to, if we go, well, it's more of a comment, but let me just say, if we go forward in any meaningful way, I would hope that the procurement process is buttoned up, ironclad, made clear, because this has happened in too many communities, and I think otherwise what might be a positive program is diminished because of it. Doctor, is any of the data regarding incidents that occurred before and after, does it segment vehicular incidents versus pedestrian incidents?
Yes, but our data isn't extremely strong on the pedestrian end, I'd say, quite as well as our vehicular. So separating it isn't quite as effective.
All right, I think, Mr. Chairman, that's important data to have again, if especially this argument, whether it's legitimate or not, that certain communities, there's a disproportionate level of red light, this kind of program and enforcement in certain communities. I mean, the fact of the matter is, there's a chance that a vehicle that's involved in an incident comes from that community, but there's almost a 100% chance that the pedestrian definitely comes from that community. So I think we have to look at the safety factor, not just in terms of vehicles, but also in terms of pedestrians. And that's why, and I think, again, when the inevitable discussion starts to happen, why is our neighborhood being targeted? The fact of the matter is, because we're trying to protect the lives of your neighbors who happen to be walking through an intersection where this is a problem. I have a few other questions, but again, I'll yield and if you
I'll
can
go
come
to
back to me, that'd
Dan,
be great.
who's his hand up, waiting patiently, and I'll come back to you, Joe. Dan, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. I've got a couple questions. First off, is there any, through your research, curious to know if there was any alternative or complementary technologies like intelligent traffic systems or anything like that that could further enhance the safety benefits of red light cameras. Specifically, can these systems be expanded to include crash detection within a certain number of feet, to not just be limited to red light running, but if there's a crash within a certain number of feet of the intersection, if it can pick that up as well, if that's an enhancement that can be added, especially in school zones, where there are, vulnerable people all the time. And additionally, I'm all for, this is just my opinion, I'm all for bringing back red light cameras. As I've mentioned before, I think Phoenix is kind of like delved into a cultural, it's culture of bad driving. And it really is going to take something to shock the conscience of the community citywide to kind of like make them wake up. And I think that, I would be in, I think there was a part of slide in there that mentioned, you brought up fines and citations and all that stuff. I think the higher the fine from the outset will act as a deterrent itself. Not only the red light cameras themselves over time will be a deterrent, but I think having that initial fine being heavy needs, because we need to really curb this culture of bad driving. You can't, I mean, it's everybody will agree, it's everywhere. So I appreciate your thorough report. And those were just the two things that I wanted to mention. But do you think that's they can be enhanced to add like crash detection and stuff like that, or what's your opinion?
Just to clarify, do you mean able to identify when a crash may occur and then the red light running camera would work? Or are you saying it would record the crash happening?
So I'm assuming that when it detects a red light runner, it records a certain period of time before that. This would be kind of like, I guess I'm suggesting the same type of thing where, we can, maybe it detects it's about to occur, but definitely, recording, at least detecting the impacts and recording that incident, especially when pedestrians are involved.
I'm not familiar with any technology that would be able to do that. Not to say it's not out there. I'm just not familiar with any of it. But I do know that for most of the cameras, they're not necessarily quote unquote recording in the way that we traditionally think of it, before and after.
No, I understand.
Director Brown, go ahead.
Yeah, on a related subject, we have been actively going after vehicle to everything funding, which is a new grant that in the infrastructure law. One of the things that you could potentially do is in a snowstorm or a sandstorm, storm we have in Arizona, your vehicle may know that there's a stoppage of ahead or that the number of airbags have been deployed. So tying in our video technology, our radio technology, and Jorge and Carl are working on that actively with the county. You've got a grant as well to put more of those systems in place. So we do have that communication between signals back to our traffic management center, as well as the ability to get that information in your car. And certain models, especially American models, after I think it's 2019, have that technology automatically installed in their car. So when you buy a car, you can turn that on or turn it off. If it asks to have it turned off, if you don't want to turn it on when you buy your car. So it's something in the future that you're going to see, practically in every vehicle.
Interesting.
Thank you.
I also have a few questions, if I may. Oh, right here.
Oh, hey, Julian, go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. According to the report, there was a right-angle crashes, well, a reduction in right-angle crashes with slightly more rear-ended crashes. Do you have more data on that specifically? What locations? And how that was collected as well, I guess.
Yes, we do have that information. I do not know it off the top of my head, which is probably unsurprising. But typically, when you have a red light running camera program, you would generally see an increase in rear end crashes. They're low stakes, really. You're not going to get injured in a rear end crash nearly as much as you would in an angle or a head on or these other types of crashes. And that's typical just because folks are slamming on their brakes a bit more going up to a red light. So that number was not surprising that we saw that increase in certain situations. I believe I can access that data, the specific locations that happened if that's needed.
Thank you. And then for the survey, there was the data collected, there was some survey done, and you mentioned that it was done with experts, and I believe it was a very low number. Can you repeat the number for us to remember?
I don't remember it off the top of my head. I believe we had at least 26 people take the survey, and then we interviewed 5.
Okay. Thinking about like the overall picture perspective, that number sounds very low. So how does that correlate to your data?
So I would say that informed our analysis and what we were going to look into. We know that that data isn't enough to come to research conclusions, but it's enough to inform the conversation, I guess is the best way to put it. Technically, we don't have a large number of transportation public agency professionals in the greater Phoenix region that would know enough about the camera program to comment on it, which is really what we were looking for. So not to say that, for example, public comment, public perception is very important when you're going to put a thing like this in place. That just wasn't the scope of the specific study.
Okay, I just have concerns with like survey being done only with like experts, quote unquote, when we're all experts, we're all over the city, so.
Totally agree, you're right. I think there's other ways that could have been phrased in the report that maybe would note transportation professionals in a different way. Just because we work in this business doesn't mean everyone else is not an expert. Totally agree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. I see Dan's hand is still, oh, Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, everybody. I was late. I figured I would not run any red lights trying to come to this meeting. That would be ironic. I wanted to actually say something to Dan about your question about technology. So I'm actually oddly enough, a consultant for a software company that is developing currently 911 real life 24/7 crash analysis. And it does detect about 100 feet away from the entire intersection. And what we're trying to work on right now is the ability to connect to 911 operators, so fire, police, first aid and hospital, so we can kind of cut back on those seconds of when that crash happens. They get that automatic picture and it's not delayed, and then being able to work with the street light system and the fire truck and police truck routes and know the direction that they're going to be able to automatically change the lights to all green, because not everybody always respects the right kind of old age laws. You pull over, some people just don't care and they'll keep going. So even those, 1 to 2 seconds matter. So to sum up, yes, Dan, there is technology out there, and some people are working on some stuff, and hopefully some of these things will be implemented in the city or other cities sometime soon. I'm trying to work with the city of Austin as well, because I did see that list on there as one of the big ones. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Joe, I'm gonna come back to you. Joe Uhas, do you have, did you have another question or two? Go ahead, Joe.
I do. Doctor, do you, what do you find about Phoenix versus your other studies? Anything consistent or abnormal with what you found in other communities? I know no two are the same, but I'm asking more of a general question.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference between City of Phoenix, certainly driver behavior is different in every state. Massachusetts has different driver behavior than Phoenix. We know that. We also have an older population in Phoenix. We also have a lot more people walking year round in Phoenix. These are obvious things that we all know. One thing that's happening across the country, not specific to Phoenix, is that we're seeing an increase in driver acceptance of risk. After the pandemic, we see crashes rising across the country. It's not just in Arizona. And this, according to human factors research, is very likely due to everyone's just higher level of risk tolerance. So you might be a little riskier when you drive now than different time before the pandemic. So those are just my 2 cents. I don't think what's happening in Phoenix is that different. I think it's just the context of Phoenix makes it slightly different than the rest of some other cities, I should say.
And the communities that on your chart that had a program but then ended them, I know it's probably not this cut and dry, but I'm just kind of curious if you could say to what degree were those decisions made based on statistics and science that it wasn't working or that it made things worse versus what I would just generally lump together as, more political concerns, objections in the community, policymakers who didn't agree, just kind of lump all those reasons together that really had no basis in science, but it was more about the controversy.
Right. I can't speak to necessarily why they were taken down, other than we did not find any data that said they made the safety situation worse. That was not located in any documents we identified from those cities. It was not a reason why it was taken down. It is unclear if it was community driven, political, but would not be shocking based on some of the things we read. But it was not based on data because they didn't work as far as we've been able to research.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm gonna go to Dan and then Abby. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, what, was there, just curious, how did you address any potential biases in the empirical analysis when you were comparing the crash data from intersections with and without the red light running cameras?
Great question. So we attempted to, in that empirical Bayes analysis, compare red light running camera locations to similar locations that did not have red light running cameras that were relatively nearby, that had a similar makeup of volume and then a similar makeup of the intersection type. Well, certainly intersection type, but in terms of how many lanes are going into the intersection. That's not to say there aren't biases with any transportation study, because there certainly are. Like, those intersections were not exactly the same. They definitely had slightly different volumes at different times of day. We didn't necessarily take into account what happened at night versus during the day. So I could probably go on and on about the number of limitations that would happen with any study. That did happen with this one as well, but our results are still statistically significant with what we reported. That more limits us in how specific we can get with our reporting, and that's why you don't see more specific reporting than what we did in the report, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I appreciate thank you very much. That's all I had, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the presentation.
Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm just curious what other projects U of A is doing for our streets department, if you guys have those.
I am not actively doing anything with the City of Phoenix, but my colleagues, my colleague, Dr. Wu, I believe maybe, but I'm not involved in those. So at this time, my knowledge is not any right at the current moment, but we've worked with the City of Phoenix for many years on many different projects.
So do you guys know which one she's talking about that Wu was working on?
I believe the one Dr. Wu is working on might be completed. We don't directly work on it. Dr. Wu does a lot more with signal aspects and signal timing or different technology aspects with signal stuff. We have worked with U of A and several universities on several projects throughout the years.
Well, so you don't know exactly what that study is?
I can maybe speak to that a little bit. I wasn't on the study, but I know they've looked at signal operations and what the best timing would be for red light running and how, not related to cameras, but just red light running in general. I'm happy if you shoot me an email to provide you a list of those studies in the papers. I definitely know we have them. It's just a matter of, I wasn't around at the U of A before when they got started, but I can definitely send those to you if you send me an email.
Okay, thank you. And I just have a couple questions about like the mapping. I looked at that a lot and mapped it out on my cell phone, Google Earth, using those addresses you had. But like, why does it appear that there are few to no cameras in District 1 and District 6 versus other districts?
Gosh, that's a good question. I don't know. In our research, when we were listening to the previous meetings and going over the data on why those specific locations were determined, those conversations either didn't come up or there was too much to review. We didn't get to that point. So I'm not sure.
Like, there's no crash data that you looked at to determine?
Oh, sorry. I think I misunderstood your question. So there was no crash data at some specific locations?
Well, like in District 1 and District 6, there are few to little red light cameras in those districts. Like, what did you look at to determine where you put the red light cameras? Research.
Gotcha. We didn't put them anywhere. So we studied this the past year after the program was not unfortunately, they were just taken down. That's what happened. And so we studied the history of it, but I don't know who made those decisions necessarily and how they were made.
Well, would Streets be able to answer that one a little bit to see why there are less in District 1 and District 6?
Maybe, Tom, go ahead. Tom might shed some light on this as a former employee.
I was the director when this program was first started, and we had 10 locations that were funded. And if my memory serves me correctly, and it's getting foggier and foggier by the day, we had one in each council district to start with. And then we had 2 at large that were picked at primarily more hazardous intersections that we determined. I think that's what we did. I wouldn't swear on the Bible.
Carl, and you were about to answer. Thank you.
We'd have to look closer into it, but my understanding is we did look at collision data, specifically red light running data, and looked at locations that were highest red light. Now, whether or not that was the primary purpose and where everything went, that part we're not sure.
But did you start with what he said? Start with one in each district?
wasn't here then.
That was a while ago.
Well, that's good research to know. Just because red light cameras, everyone knows, they're historically known to be used as a way to target divested communities. And when you mentioned Chicago, I watched a lot of interviews and talks with Chicago residents. And one quote said, "We're putting a financial burden on communities that are already poor instead of investing in engineering to solve the problem that solves this traffic violence," which we know speeding, you said that the main cause of red light running was speeding. And we know that speeding increases with the road design and what we do to the road lane widths. Interesting. I have a little bit more to add on this. I know you guys have a couple more questions, but one thing I found, the U.S. Department of Transportation on roundabouts, this was really interesting. It's instead of the red light cameras, there was an 82% reduction in fatal and injury crashes. And at signalized intersections, a roundabout, it was about an 80% reduction in fatal crashes. And we were talking about like 20, 25 roughly. So I thought that was just a good thing to point out and have on our minds. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Just to comment on that briefly, all about roundabouts too. I know that they're very effective in communities I've been in the past. They're everywhere. But I just want to note that our transportation safety discussion is well-rounded, right? It focuses on road design, absolutely. It focuses on enforcement, absolutely, and education. Those are quote-unquote 3Es. There's also a 4th E coming about, equity, which is also certainly very important. So when we have the safety conversation, roundabouts absolutely make sense in a lot of locations, and they may not make sense in other locations. Maybe you put a camera there, maybe you don't. So it's this fun game all the time of what makes sense where, very context-driven. But I absolutely agree. I'm a big fan of roundabouts, and I do teach my students that.
That's great to hear. I've got a couple of questions as well. Also a big roundabout fan. I was struck. Maybe that's the bad word choice, but I was also picked up on that 28.7% number of the crash decrease, and that kind of layered on top. And I really came into this committee with an open mind when I was appointed on red light enforcement. We had a presentation about a year ago looking at kind of comparing Phoenix to other cities nearby, Paradise Valley, Scottsdale, Chandler, other places that have programs, and the data was significant. There was a significant difference, and I feel what Dan said. I agree with what Dan said about there's a palpable feeling of poor driving, reckless driving, of dangerous driving out there. And it was interesting to hear what you said about kind of coming out of the pandemic, people just being bad drivers. Some of us, come from states where there's mandatory driver's education, things like that. Unfortunately, in Arizona, there isn't. And I think that builds on a culture of reckless driving. And I know your study, or your recommendations is further analysis. And I know that's, as an academic and somebody who's, commissioned by the city, that's a pretty, but I don't mean this in a negative way necessarily, it's a safe, thing to say. But I wanted to go out there. This is a huge problem. Red light running, as you didn't diminish. People are dying out there on the streets, and we're not going to improve by doing the same things we have been doing. And the data is there that these cameras are working. I'm of the same school of, the engineering solutions and design solutions are better. And that's what's going to get us kind of further. But there's people dying every day, and we've got to try new things out there. Last year, Judge and Roz was crossing 56th Street and Camelback Road, wheelchair bound. She got the go ahead to cross the street. She did, was struck, killed by a red light runner. That's District 6. This is a problem that's happening in every single place in every single district in our city. And those numbers and things that we're reading about, I only tell that story because everybody who's hurt seriously and who's killed, that affects their entire family, that affects their entire community. And if there is further analysis, so I'm for more action, you know, but if there is further analysis, I would encourage you to talk to those, not just the professionals, but the impacted people. At our last meeting, we had somebody whose sister had been struck and killed crossing the street. And I would encourage you to solicit those stories from those impacted communities of what red light running is doing to those families. And I know that's not a question, but if you want to respond to anything, feel free. But if you don't, I'll go ahead and move on.
I just want to say I absolutely agree. All those numbers are people, right? And I think we are quick to talk about the numbers, which are important, but everyone is a story of a person. So we need to be remembering that this is a serious conversation. And when I said there's further analysis, I think it depends on what the decision is by the people on that. There always can be more analysis. I think the analysis that would absolutely need to be done is understanding how you would even put a program in place that would be successful. Talking to like Paradise Valley, for example, my conversations with them were really insightful, and how they got the community backing and why it's been successful. You have to build it in a way that isn't just sudden. I think it has to be intentional. That's not to say it has to take necessarily a very long time, or you need multiple years of analysis. That's, I guess my point being there is there's a little bit more that would need to be done before we put in place again, just to make sure it's intentional.
Julian, go ahead.
Thank you. Something that would have definitely helped me understand the data would have been pictures to see what the intersections look like where the cameras were placed. Otherwise, it's hard to imagine what it looked like and what could have been different besides the camera being in place.
Great comment. Agreed.
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, speaking with further analysis, I was wondering if there's anything that's been looked at other cities, like New York City, I know has like a ton. I think majority of their lights are at leading pedestrian intervals. If there's been any notice of increased safety benefits with red light running and having leading pedestrian intervals combined.
I don't know of any studies off the top of my head that would look at both at the same time. From my research, I don't think so, just because, especially in the last few years, but that's not to say they couldn't multiply in some way. You can technically multiply these things called crash modification factors and come out with a number. It's just a matter of if that would reflect Phoenix or not.
Okay. Dan, I'll give you what probably will be the last question from the committee before I go to, we have one person from the public signed up to speak. Dan,
Thank you. I appreciate it. So this is just a couple of observations. So with the increased timing for the yellow lights, I'm still noticing there's a lot of people just running those at the last minute, trying to get through. So it looks like people are just they're adapting to the longer yellows, to basically you're thinking it gives them more time to get through the red. That's one thing. And then ultimately this comes down to engineering and street design. The reason that we have to have red light cameras is because the streets are too wide. The speed limits are too high. And it just gives an opportunity for people just to disregard the health, the safety and welfare of others, because they've got to be somewhere in a hurry. So I think, when we get down to it, if we've got, more speed mitigation, put in, modify the way we design our streets, to lower our speed limits, then we're going to see, those effect, the results of that take effect. But then obviously this is another tool in the toolbox. So I just think that, there's a lot of things here to digest and to move forward on. I'd just like to possibly explore this at a later date, again, as a committee, if and when before this goes to council, if this is something that is going to council. I think this is a a relevant topic that warrants further discussion.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. We have one more question from Abby before I go to the public.
Yeah, just a quick one, kind of backing, sorry I missed it. Well, I wrote it down while you were talking earlier. Will fees for the offenders be based off of their income?
I'm not in control of any of that, but that would be an interesting study to look into. Other programs, not red light running camera related, have different fees for different things in transportation, so.
Okay, well, sorry, I was looking at you, but I guess I'd be more for the streets department.
That's something to be determined. You know, if and when automated enforcement returns to Phoenix, that's one of many factors that have to be looked at. Additional equity that came up in the general equation. So that's something that we really can't comment on because it's something that has to be considered in the future.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Nicole Rodriguez, who is here virtually. Nicole, can you unmute yourself? Okay, wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So a couple of things that I was listening in on. My name's Nicole Rodriguez. For those who know me, I serve on the Urban Phoenix Project Board, but these comments today are my opinion and research as well, and they're not representative of UPP. So it's still unclear why Streets has brought this to the agenda. That's not been made clear. We don't know if it's driven by a council member or council members or a specific group, specific person. So I would like that to be clarified at some point, if not today. And that is true. I mean, we had a student member here do her due diligence as a member and serving on this board doing research ahead of time. And it is true about the roundabouts. When we're talking about red light cameras with an FXC rate of approximately 25% of saving lives, but then we have infrastructure that can be implemented within a fairly reasonable amount of time that can save up to 80% of lives. I think that's worth having a discussion about, don't you guys? Roundabouts is something I think we need to more seriously talk about. And if there's an outage, street signal lights are not going to work. We're still going to have issues when there's outages in regions. Roundabouts don't have those issues. Another thing that I notice on the mapping as well is disproportionately in the West Valley and South Side, we're seeing a lot of those cameras, right? A lot of those regions have a lack of reliable transit, lack of safe sidewalk infrastructure, and good bus stops. And here we're putting this potentially going to put a burden of red light cameras in those regions where also the income level is a lot lower. And we also know that red light camera companies have investors in them, and some being our state pensions are invested in these companies. There's going to be a conflict of interest that I hope we look at when we're potentially considering red light cameras for the future. Also within the study, I've reviewed it myself. There's some duplicate locations of red light cameras mentioned throughout the different install years, and they're for the same direction. They're not that like north and south. Some were mentioned for both directions twice. So, and then you also have one in there that says Van Buren, Van Buren. Just some discrepancies I saw that I wanted to point out. And then, you know, with that too, just considering when we're really talking about equity, what does that mean? Because still I'm seeing how this disproportionately impacts those areas that are going to have less access to reliable transit and lower incomes. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is the neighborhood traffic. And first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Bryant. You are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. I don't know if you've got back to Tucson tonight. If you have to leave, that's okay. But thank you so much. We really appreciate having you.
May I interrupt real quick?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, we're gonna get a response to the comment. Can we allow some space for that? I'm sure the speaker might appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could start just on the roundabout conversation. I love roundabouts. You know, when we talk about context sensitive design and how this is not like that's why there needs to be more further analysis before red light running cameras would be part of this toolbox that is a larger conversation on how infrastructure is designed, where roundabouts may make sense. And I will say red light running cameras, one benefit from the research is that they can be put in a lot faster than a roundabout could, especially in terms of cost. Like there are other solutions besides roundabouts that are also awesome in terms of design, but they can't be implemented within a 3-month period. So I absolutely agree with there needs to be really good structure to something like this. It can't just be put in place without a lot of conversation and a lot of understanding and looking at what has gone well in a lot of other cities before we get put in place. But yeah, it is a really good tool in the toolbox. That is a larger part of the conversation.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you, Julia. Moving on to our next agenda item 7, neighborhood traffic mitigation. Carl Langford.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So today I'm here to talk about our neighborhood traffic calming program that we have here in Phoenix. Yeah, so today we'll go over a little bit of some of our different programs that we have and some of the devices. So specifically, we'll talk a little bit more about speed humps, speed cushions, kind of our traffic calming petitioning process, stop sign evaluations that we do, speed limit reductions, bike lanes, no left turn arrows. These are all programs that are available to the public today. And then we'll talk some about our retired traffic calming programs, so some things that happened previously in the city, and also some developer things that come into play with traffic calming as well. So to start off with, the main program that City of Phoenix has is really speed humps and speed cushions for our neighborhood traffic calming. So a speed hump, you can see a picture there. It's, pretty much all of us have probably driven through them. They run continuously across the street. They're for local streets only. So specifically a local street. The city has the whole network of city streets divided into different types. So the neighborhood streets are generally your local streets. That's where most everybody lives. And collector streets are slightly larger streets that we call them collectors. They collect the traffic from the locals and move them to the arterial streets. And arterial streets are your major streets throughout the city where you have traffic signals and other items. All right. Now it doesn't want to change.
Hey, Carl, just so I'm clear, what's the significance of a street being called a collector? Is there certain programs that are available to a collector that are available to get the other, not the material, the local? Okay.
Yeah. So for example here, and we'll see if we can get this working again. The local street specifically is a speed hump, and I'll talk a little bit more about a speed cushion. That's specifically for collector streets. So.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so one question we get when we go out in the neighborhoods is they're like, hey, well, we want a speed bump. Well, specifically inside the city street, it's a speed hump. It's intended to slow traffic to roughly 20 miles an hour. Speed bumps are much different. They're what you see in parking lots that pretty much you have to almost stop to crawl over. So they're very much different. And so we want to make sure people understand that. In our speed hump program, there is requirements for costs associated to the neighborhoods. So we'll go in a little bit more, but we determine what an average speed is on the roadway, and then based on the average speed, it determines the cost for the neighborhood. So if the average speed is 25 or less, then it's $1,200 per hump, because basically that's not really any speeding. There may be some outliers on the street. It's more as the speed increases, we lower that speed. The city subsidizes all of these by a significant amount. And where there's more speeding, the city is subsidizing quite a bit more. So speed cushions are the other ones that we have, and speed cushions specifically are for the collector streets. And the main difference with them is they have these, you can kind of see the slits there in the middle of the road. What that is, that's designed for a fire truck to be able to go through those slits without really having to slow down. Fire trucks have a wider wheelbase than pretty much all vehicles that are out on the road today. And so it doesn't slow down emergency response for the fire trucks on the collector streets, because they are intended to get access more to the neighborhoods directly. So in a speed cushion, you can see here the costs associated with those. Because speed cushions are on collectors, which is typically slightly larger, and with the cuts, they're a little more expensive to install as well. So there, it's about $2,800 when there's not speeding present. When you do have quite a bit of speeding, it's as low as $200. So now to talk a little bit about the process. So let's say a neighborhood's interested in going through either a speed hump or speed cushion program. We start with really it's a request form. Probably an application is a better word for it. You go out, get 10 neighbors to sign this report that basically says, hey, we have concerns, we have some reasons we'd be interested in doing speed hump, speed cushion. And that's really to make sure that it's a neighborhood driven process and not just one person in the neighborhood that's like, everybody keeps driving too fast and everybody else in the neighborhood is like, no, we're not. So, and then from there, so once we get back the traffic report or the study request, I should say, we go out and we do a traffic study on the road. And the traffic study is done with what we call a tube counter. So you can see a picture there. It's basically looks like black lines across the road. And what those are is as a vehicle drives over it, it gets feedback that's able to tell, the counter can say, hey, a vehicle drove through, it can tell how fast the vehicle, it can give you some vehicle classification as well on it. And so really we're looking at the speeds to figure out what are the speeds that are happening on the roadway. So the next phase, so we get back that, we'll send the neighborhood out a letter saying, hey, here's the average speed, here's the cost for the speed humps or speed cushions. We create what's called a verbal map. And this is maybe a little harder to explain, but let's say this road here, they have the ability to put 3 in. So they have to be 500 feet apart from each other. There's some other clarifications. You can't have drainage issues and other things that might create problems. And so from there, our requirements are 100% approval within 100 feet. So we send out this verbal map to say, hey, go get kind of approval, make sure these people are okay with it. Because if one of those homes comes back and says, no, I don't want that thing in front of my house, that they have that ability. So oftentimes it's a couple back and forth with maybe the resident in charge. They'll go out and figure out, okay, we need to move this one, shift this one over here, maybe get rid of one depending on the spacing and whatnot. We don't want them to go out and do all the petitioning and then find out, 2/3 of the way through, well, I can't put this one in at all, and then have to go back to everybody else and say, well, I can't put that one in, you need to re-sign, because it's a change. So from there, once you kind of have the verbal map, you kind of say, hey, yep, I'm good to go with that. We have the petitioning requirements, and again, our petitioning is 100% within 100 feet, and then 70% of the overall boundary area. And for the most part, that's people that live directly on the road. And a boundary area contains roughly 30 to 60 homes. And it kind of varies depending on the exact street, the exact neighborhood, and whatnot. So another thing to mention about this is our traffic calming budget. So we have a yearly budget of about $400,000 for our traffic calming program. It costs us in the city, it's about $5,000 per speed hump, about $7,000 per speed cushion today. The last several years, we've installed 30 some odd humps, 30 some odd cushions, and that pretty much eats up all of the budget that we have. So another thing to take into consideration, the maintenance, repairs, rebuilds, they come out of this budget as well. So we end up spending more money every year than what we really have. We go try to scrounge around other stuff. Some years we have to kind of tell people, hey, hold on a bit, we'll get to you in the next fiscal year. So there may be a little bit of delay with that. But one thing to note, so basically we're using up all the budget that we have at this point. So now we want to talk a little about stop signs. So this is something we always hear from residents. They're like, oh, well, just throw up a stop sign. If we installed stop signs everywhere, somebody requested stop signs, nobody would get very far on our streets. We'd be stopping almost everywhere. One of the main things to note is stop signs are really a traffic control device. They're not a traffic calming device. So there's certain regulations as we look at for stop signs based on kind of volumes, crash data aspect, visibility, and whatnot. Improperly putting in a stop sign can ultimately lead to more collisions. When we put improper stop signs in, people don't tend to stop. We get a lot of complaints. And all we can do as traffic engineers is make sure that the sign is there, it's available, it's visible, people know that they're there. You may be surprised, may not. There's a lot of people that will absolutely just disregard stop signs. They know it's there, absolutely, and they don't care. Another item that we can do for neighborhood areas.
So Carl, I didn't understand the stop sign. I know people have blown stop signs, but you saying neighborhoods can request a stop sign? I heard a lot about when stop signs aren't good, but.
So they can request an evaluation of it. So we have a lot of evaluation to determine if a stop sign is needed or warranted in the area. So we go out and look at traffic control items, traffic control concepts, and should that be a stop sign location?
And what are the standards that you look at? We got one in my neighborhood, the neighborhood association, the neighbors really wanted one. And the city said no, but then the business came in and moved in, and they also wanted it. And eventually, with the business's help, we got it put in, and it's much better there. But so what are the standards? I mean, kind of do you take public input into account at all?
So public input really is not something regarding a stop sign directly. It's really about engineering aspects with visibility, traffic, how much traffic. Four-way stop, for example, really needs fairly equal traffic back and forth to qualify for a four-way stop. Public involvement is, obviously we go and evaluate and see based on that, but a traffic control device is a stop sign. It's based on analysis and warrants, whatnot for the area. So next item is speed limit reviews. So we get a lot of requests to evaluate the speed limit. We'll go out, we collect a bunch of data, volume, speeds that are happening, collision history, access. We look at all those things, determine whether or not a recommended change to the speed limit would take place. And then one thing to note, we don't directly change the speed limits. We make recommendations to council. They're the ones that ultimately change the speed limit on those.
Yeah, so, sorry, Carl, before you go back, I just want to make sure I understand that. So a person can request a speed limit review, is that right?
So yes, we get a call in, and for a speed limit evaluation, we'll go out, do evaluations. Now, there's some roads where, evaluation is very limited well, no, I take that back. There are some requests we get that don't make a whole lot of sense, that the evaluation might be a bit limited compared to some other locations.
And who would somebody contact if they want to do a speed limit review in their neighborhood?
The main point of contact for that is, I'll have to get back to you the number directly. General number can get to it as well.
General City of Phoenix number?
General street.
Streets number, okay. Okay, call Laura here, call directly Joe Brown here. Okay, and then just before we go off of that one, what are you looking at? You're doing, the city's doing its review. Are you looking at like how fast people are going? Are you looking at, what are you looking at? Are you looking at people getting struck and killed? What are you looking at?
So it's a varies of factor. So we're looking at what's the overall volume on the road, what is the speed that's going, kind of the 50th percentile speed, that's the average speed people are doing. An engineering factor is 85th percentile speed, and that's kind of 85% of the traffic's going that or slower. We look at collision history throughout the areas. We're looking at kind of access. Is there, how many driveways, what type of driveways, how much access to the road? Are there front-facing homes, back-facing, side-facing? Those type of things that play. Road classification comes into play. So depending on the type of road classification, there are certain standards. So a local road is 25 miles an hour throughout the city, any local roads. And so there's varying factors that we look at. We'll go out and see and evaluate and determine what's kind of the best speed limit for the area.
Okay.
So, and then another item we have is bike lanes or striping. So oftentimes on collector streets, especially, they're a little bit wider. We can add more bike lanes and or striping that narrows up the road lanes, and that can have an effect on calming traffic down. In studies in Phoenix, we see some that definitely does calm traffic down, and some others that we've done that not really, it doesn't. So it varies depending on neighborhoods, but it is something that does help that we can go out and evaluate and do as well.
I do have a question here on bike lanes. Do you have any data collected based on complete streets and bike lanes versus not having them in some of these roads? Is there any difference between like crashes or death mortality?
I don't know that we have any data specifically related to that. We do have some speed data that we've done, some befores and afters to kind of evaluate, and it is kind of hit and miss. Some locations have seen a drop in speed. Some locations we have actually seen an increase in speed. So, but we don't necessarily have data on the other at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to make a comment and start, you know, unless the bike lanes are protected or they're separate, you know, curb separated, they're basically just on-street parking. 'Cause they create more hazards for bicyclists and pedestrians who have to go around obstructions in the bike lanes. So that was, just wanted to make a comment. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Very good. So another program that we do have is no left turn arrows. So this is for specifically local streets that an arterial street has access to a local street. And so with those, there's a criteria for it. We go out and we do a traffic study to figure out how many vehicles are making that turn movement and how many vehicles are on that local street. So it requires at least 1,000 vehicles a day or 100 vehicles an hour making that specific turn movement. From there is a petition aspect that goes out because it does apply to everyone on the street. There's not a pass that says, well, I live on that street, I can turn here, but everybody that doesn't live on the street can't turn there. So it is something that is petitioned because it does create an impact to people that live on the street and potentially the people that other streets that they'll now have to drive on. So the petitions end up fairly large with that as well because of how many people it applies to. But there isn't any signs or whatnot that says, where's that? Everybody else has to not go here, but I get to go in this place. So it doesn't exist. All right, so now going into a little bit of our traffic calming program history. So as far as research and stuff that we found, so roughly March of 2000, we went to Phoenix City Council to really establish this current speed hump program that we kind of have today. Really, and what that was is it formalized a program that allowed the city to help pay for speed humps, speed cushions. Speed humps at that point in time. Prior to then, the city did allow speed humps and other traffic calming, but everything had to happen where the neighborhood got approval to do it. They'd go out, hire a contractor, get it to happen, install it, pay for it all themselves. And so this was really an opportunity in 2000 that council or the streets department said, hey, we want to create a formal program, have some funding behind it, and standardize the process for it. In 2013, we went back to council to modify a bit and created the speed cushion process. So prior to then, collector streets didn't have an opportunity for any speed humps or any traffic calming in that regard. And so with that, we really finalized, opened up the speed cushion. There was a lot of communication back and forth with the fire department to make sure that they bought off on the speed cushion and how the speed cushions would work for them as their emergency access getting through on those streets as well. So, and then next to talk a little bit, kind of this, we call it retired traffic program. It really was the 2006 GO bond program. So in 2006, there was a large GO bond for the whole city. One of the programs in there was specifically a traffic calming program. It was designated specifically for collector streets. It had several varied installations that could happen. We'll go into a little more detail on that. The big thing to know, it was very much neighborhood driven. So neighborhoods came, asked, hey, can we do this? There were several meetings that would take place, talking to previous staff that had been here quite a while. Several of these took dozens or so meetings at the neighborhoods to come up with the design, what they want, to get kind of the approval for everybody before something actually happened. So a little bit about what it did. So a lot of it was traffic circles, a couple of roundabouts, chicanes were installed. Those are kind of the primary. There were a couple of choker type designs as well. But again, main point is collector type streets is where these were installed on. And then the process for it, so like I said, there was quite a bit of planning that was involved, meeting with the neighborhoods to go over, okay, what type of design, where exactly would it go, what would fit into it. At this time, everything required a temporary testing phase for it. So they'd go in and put in these temporary devices with, delineators and whatnot. And it would have to stay in for at least 6 to 9 months. There was a petitioning process, same aspect of the 100% within 100 feet, 70% of the overall area. These areas were much larger than our speed humps ones, so typically it wouldn't be uncommon that with probably 200 homes or better on some of these. And it took quite a while to get approval and whatnot. So these would get installed based on petitions, and then once these were installed, they had to be there at least 6 to 9 months before a secondary petition came through for the neighborhood to say, hey, is this something that we can do? Can we get this installed? And then if it went through the petitioning process and everything, they'd ultimately get installed into the neighborhood and whatnot, based on the aspects that were there. So, and that kind of concludes kind of the Go Bond program. So another thing to mention, so there are a couple, it's relatively rare, large developments that come in that have some traffic calming aspects as well. This is generally part of a rezoning stipulation that needs to happen. So it needs to be a rezoning aspect to make it happen. If it's not really rezoning, this isn't something that comes up. The street transportation involvement in that, a lot of it is really planning and development with the developer, development with the neighborhood. Our real role is that we review the type of traffic calming to be considered. So ultimately we need to say, because it will be our city street, so we need to make sure that it is a traffic calming that we can have on our streets, that we can, allow and make sure it will still flow with drainage concerns and other items, and something that is maintainable with the street. And then also our role is we review the petition to confirm whether or not the petition was successful, because we're kind of that neutral party. The developer themselves have incentive to maybe not have the petition passed, because then it doesn't have to get installed. Neighborhood themselves, they have incentive that they generally want the things installed. So the streets ends up being kind of that third party to review and make sure that it's meeting all the petition requirements. So, and that kind of goes over our traffic calming program here at the city.
Questions? I'm gonna start with Jamie. We're just gonna go right on down. Jamie?
Question on the petition side of things. Now, is this the homeowners or are renters included in the petition? Because I could see in a lot of maybe where areas where there's more renters may not have maybe they want their streets to be safer, but their landlord might not care whether it's safer or not for them.
Yeah. So on our traffic calming speed hump, speed cushion, I can't say for sure on the older one. Just because we weren't around, I don't know on that one. We do allow renters to sign. We basically say renters are supposed to let their homeowner know that they've signed for it. Do we know that per se? We don't, but yes, renters can sign.
Go ahead, Colin.
Hello, I just had a question about the no left turn signal that is timed, more like the time of day, like it was saying it was like 6 to 9. Is there any study done afterwards after those signs are put up to see like compliance with those types of signs? Because I imagine there's not like a lot of respect for the time signs, and sometimes they can also be confusing. In the example, that one was more simple, but like if you were to compare it to, like Phoenix's, quote unquote, like suicide lanes, there's like confusion with compliance.
Yeah. So these signs are specific for typically a commute aspect. So it's typically a short duration, either in the morning or in the afternoon. Compliance is kind of generally an issue. We have not done hardly any of these in the last several years, simply because it's kind of difficult to meet that criteria. Most of the streets that had a lot of cut through that meet that criteria got petitioned in and installed several years ago. We work quite closely with police whenever we're going to install a new one, so that police enforcement can be there to begin with. But again, compliance wise, we all know people that see signs, we know they see the signs, and yet they choose to ignore them.
Yeah, had a good one.
Go ahead, Abby.
I also had a question about the left turn arrow signals. Do you have all the locations for that? Because it wasn't included in the agenda, just the locations of all the left turn signals.
As far as those restrictive signs, I don't know that we have a direct list of all of them, because they've been throughout several years, and unfortunately we don't have a direct list of them. We could maybe get a part of the list, but I don't know where all of them are at the moment.
I'm gonna go with Lavender, then Julian, then Dan. Go ahead, Lavender.
So I have a question about the language in regards to the retired, traffic calming program. So what does that exactly mean in terms of, could they be done again? Like, I'm just curious as to what that means.
So really, that was the 2006 GO bond that did that. The 2006 GO bond ran out of funding a little bit quicker than a lot of people thought. There was kind of a big recession in 08, 09. Talking to staff that had been here previously, everybody thought, hey, it's going to come back up. It's going to come back up. And then eventually it was like, well, no, it's not going to come back up. So it's more a program that we did have that ended. To get that program back would require significant funding. We'd heard that they had funding of upwards of several million to up to $10 million per year in that program, and significantly more staff to be able to do it as well. Because there was, like I said, oftentimes a dozen or more meetings that would take place in one neighborhood.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Julian.
I have several questions. The first one's, well, first of all, this is great information, and this is the first time that I hear some of this. The people could make changes to the streets and request some adjustments to it. How is this information being delivered to the public?
So we have a website that has a lot of this information. Oftentimes when there is neighborhood meetings and or block watch grants, NSD is telling a lot of people about this information as well. And that's the main way. So there's quite a bit of information in that regard. But as far as us specifically reaching out to neighborhoods, that part we don't really do specifically.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is regarding the budget. You mentioned that it's a low budget and then sometimes you guys go over budget. And I understand how the City of Phoenix, so the city council approves the city budget. Why isn't there more funding being added to your department if you're going over budget? And yeah, I'm just curious of how can we support you as like community members? How can we advocate for more money to be allocated to this department?
That's probably another question I can answer. So.
Over your contact, you're right, we need more funding here. There's $10 million a year that's allocated for Vision Zero activities. Part of our job as this commission, as this committee, is to give advice as to how that should be spent to most effectively. $10 million, frankly, is not a lot of money. As folks are sitting to my left can all attest, I'm sure. So we need more, and it's more we as citizens certainly can and should be doing to advocate for more. But there is $10 million a year, and there's, you know, part of it is using our voice to give advice of how that should be spent, and then going outside this room and advocating more.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just gonna mention as well, there are community budget meetings, right? So beyond for the fiscal years every year, they're throughout the council districts, they talk to the communities, they want to hear input from you, they want to know what's important to the community. Driving your neighbors, your friends, those that live in those communities to go out and talk about it is what starts to inform their decision making as well. So, you know, we ultimately can put something in the budget in terms of this is what we need, right? So Joe would know this, you know, what are we asking for? What are we advocating for? But at the end of the day, the city council has to make some tough decisions right across the board. This is the you know, the amount of money we have, and we have to start to disseminate all that money across all the programs the city has between parks and police and fire and everything. So the best way to do it again is to go when those community budget meetings come up before fiscal year, go out and advocate, talk about what you think is important to your community.
Okay, yeah, because I think it's pretty interesting that you mentioned there was like $400,000 allocated for projects like this ones. And at the end of the day, you have to look at other areas to come up with the money. So was that part of what you mentioned?
Yeah, so oftentimes there's a little bit more and we find some spare change is maybe the best way to put it. The only thing that happens with the budget currently is there may be some that we end up, instead of installing in this fiscal year, we wait a couple months to install it a bit later. So there's not any neighborhoods that have met the requirements for speed humps and speed cushions where we've said, hey, sorry, we're out of money. You guys aren't going to get one. It's just delayed a couple.
Lavender, go ahead.
I just want to ask about, I'm sorry, I'm asking you, but I'm a little confused, not confused, but I'm wondering if there's $10 million allocated for the Vision Zero, right? And 400,000 of that, is that correct? 400,000 of that in particular is going to the streets department no?
The 400,000 is from a separate budget, not.
Separate budget, okay, thank you.
Good question. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm living in HOA in Levine, and I've mentioned before we have a huge problem with our drive lines at the 4 surrounding schools. So we've utilized this process before, the petition process. We've had several studies done. We've had one done for speed. We've had one done for speed humps. Then we did a petition to get the no parking signs, and then the no parking between the certain hours of this and this. And those are all great tools when they work, when you have drivers that are compliant. But some nuances of the application process or the petition process that I found were that on certain things, so if you wanted to have no parking signs, or if you wanted to limit your on-street parking, the roadway has to be continuous. It can't be so if there can't be any breaks, and then if it wraps around, and then you've got, say, if an area that's owned by that's common area by the HOA, you have to go through property management or the HOA to have them sign off on that stretch of street that is, that fronts with the common area. So it can be a little bit, tedious, especially when dealing with a property management company, but it's possible. They're all great tools. We just haven't seen the success that I hope other communities have seen, because it almost like feeds the fire. That's why, I've been kind of trying to get this on the agenda about, citizen reporting of hazardous obstructions in the bike lanes or other no parking areas and stuff like that. That would be a way to add funding to the maybe Vision Zero, these streets anyway. But the program, the petition process itself, if nothing less, it gets you out and lets you meet your neighbors, and it creates awareness, because a lot of these communities have to deal with what's called cut-through traffic, and that's where people will, they don't want to deal with the traffic for drive, and then they'll cut through your neighborhood. So that's why you need something like speed humps or other types of mitigation. But one thing, and I think one of my previous conversations with Carl, when we had him out here to Levine, is that it's my understanding, there is traffic calming measures are not available for streets as designated arterials, correct? Even if they're technically collectors, but only designated an arterial, you can't implement any type of traffic calming.
Don't have any traffic calming program.
And that's unfortunate. That I think would, is something maybe that would be worth looking at to have changed in the future. Because, like the program that was lost after the Go Bond thing, I see those around every now and then. I think those are great. I think those are perfect. It doesn't reduce the traffic, and it keeps, I think it adds something to the streetscape, honestly. But anyways, those are just my thoughts. But they're tools, they're easy to use. Getting 10 signatures isn't that hard. So if it's something that, somebody, you have a friend or something that can use, definitely suggest it, because it's worth, at least it's worth the endeavor.
Thanks, Dan, I appreciate it. And Amanda, I see your hand up. I actually have an email from you I was going to read, very much on point. I don't want to, usurp if I heard you weren't feeling well, Amanda. I was going to read this statement that you wrote out very thoughtfully, unless you want to just talk, it's up to you. If you,
Please do. I appreciate that. I'm also home
Yeah.
ill and I don't want to cough into the microphone, so I appreciate you reading it for
no,
me.
that was my plan. I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. Thank you so much. Very well thought out. This is from one of our fellow committee members, Amanda. I recently worked with volunteers in my neighborhood to get a total of 12 cushions installed on 2 streets. They were just installed last month. I wanted to share some feedback on the process that you're welcome to share by reading or emailing to the committee if you feel appropriate. Overall, we ended up visiting about 150 houses at least 2 to 3 times, each between the speed study, verbal permission, and final petition signatures. We were fortunate in that the Homeowners Association and public schools supported funding them, or fundraising for them would have been an additional hurdle for volunteers. On one street, the cushions that were installed aren't evenly spaced, unfortunately due to one homeowner saying no within the 100 feet of what would have been an ideal placement. With the current rules, you can have 90% of a street sign to support the cushions, but a single homeowner can override the most effective placement of them. Volunteers discussed that it didn't feel like the program put pedestrian safety first. The few people who said no mostly expressed a desire to be able to speed on the roads unabated. We also had some homeowners who would not answer the door. They would look through the window and ignore you. So we were told to mail them letters. Those individuals can also block ideal placement of cushions. We began knocking on doors in pairs after one volunteer was yelled at and called a name by a homeowner who strongly opposed the cushions. On one street in our neighborhood, the speed limit was initially 35 miles an hour. So I was told that there was no way to get speed cushions installed when I inquired about a speed study. The city had no formal process to request lowering the speed limit by 5 miles an hour, and I was told a speed study wouldn't be done, despite my sending in photos of multiple crashes where trees, signs, and light poles were hit on the road. This is a road where kids frequently cross to go to the city park, and groups of cyclists often ride. But we were told that because there aren't many driveways on the street, it was designed to move cars fast through the neighborhood. Fortunately, we reached out to city council and have a supportive council person that heard the neighborhood's concerns, and the speed was eventually lowered. We then had to wait 6 months to do a speed limit to cure before a speed study could be done. You really have to have a committed, determined group to get these things installed. Even then, the process felt like a bit of a battle, and I wondered how these barriers impact neighborhoods with less resources. I read a streets handbook that was presented last year at city council meeting. In it, there were things like elevated crosswalks presented. I inquired about installation of these in logical places, such as a spot near the school where the principal said she was denied a second crosswalk and kids naturally crossed. It seemed like it would make more sense than a speed cushion, but I was told that these were only guidelines for new developments and that the city won't ever install these safety features in older neighborhoods. I'm grateful that the program exists and that we ultimately got 12 cushions installed, but I did feel there was a lot of room for improvement. Racing was an issue on one of our streets in our neighborhood, and that has stopped. Our community action officer recommended speed cushions to mitigate racing, but noted that he was unable to recommend areas where speed cushions would be beneficial to the city. I wondered how other cities handle this process and if there was a way to be more proactive about pedestrian safety. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions or refer you to volunteers who could share their experience. Wow, Amanda, that is some amazing work and really well thought out comments. I really appreciate it. I'm going to let Carl go ahead and if you have any thoughts or responses to Amanda.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Amanda, for doing the work. This is a program that requires a lot of neighborhood input. One of the things I maybe can say is we hear a lot from the people that are absolutely against them and the people that are for them. So, we are trying to be a balance to make sure that it's a program available and making sure that it does meet the needs. of people, and whatnot, and oftentimes neighborhoods very much disagree throughout the area. So yes, so thank you for working through the process. We know there are, potentially flaws and things in the program, but we're always trying to work to make it work the best we can.
Thank you. And I see Abby's got a comment, and I have a couple of questions as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, is the program and the petitions you were talking about, are they available in Spanish?
Yes, we do have those available.
Is that just on the city website?
Yes, it should be available on the city website.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Jamie, did you have?
No.
Okay. I have some experience with these petitions as well. We've been working on a few in my neighborhood and have some thoughts about the process, some of which are very similar to Amanda's. It does feel like a very inequitable process. I know it's not, I'm sure the intent was not to be inequitable, but I deal with a lot of issues with collector versus local, and the examples that we have of the more effective version and more resources on local. In my neighborhood, a lot of neighborhoods around me, it's a very much a mixed community with a lot of rentals, duplexes, triplexes, apartments, and those more often are being categorized as collector streets, or maybe even sometimes arterials. But the families I talk to that live there, they just want to have their kids be able to go outside and play and ride a bike and walk, but they're not getting as much of the speed mitigation because their streets are categorized as a collector or an arterial. And it seems like we're allowing higher speeds in lower income areas based on these policies that we have. And I know that's not the intent, but that's the outcome, and we're seeing that reflected in the numbers that we see, right? The amount of money that these cost doesn't seem like a ton of money for a lot of people. And a lot of people live in HOAs, which is great. They can pick up the bill, or neighborhood associations that are really well organized and can get grants. That's awesome. But a lot of our communities that people are working two jobs, there's no homeowner association, there's no community association, there's no one to pick up that tab, and even $500 is just unattainable. So I'd love to see, we talked a little bit about with the red lights, maybe income-based. This one certainly makes a lot of sense to do something where we can be more equitable in terms of the cost. Basing the cost on the speeds, what I've seen every neighborhood association do is they'll put it out on their neighborhood block watch, neighborhood like forums. Hey guys, the study's happening. Please go down Clarendon Street and speed as fast as you can, because we only have enough money in the budget to pay $500. So we need you to get out and speed. This is real. I've seen this many, many, many times. So I know it's not the intent of the program to incentivize speeding, but that's the reality of what's happening out there. So I would love to see a different model for the cost, and one that includes, financial ability in it rather than, ability to organize your neighbors to get out there and speed. I'll show you the Instagram post sometimes, but that's it, that absolute reality. And I'd love to see more for collector streets specifically. Just a more robust, I guess, tool chest. Speed humps and speed cushions maybe work in certain scenarios. Maybe they don't. Every street's different. And, the street in my neighborhood is 55 feet wide. I bet you, because there are businesses nearby and there are duplexes, I bet you the streets department calls out a collector. It's just my guess. It's Glen Rosa, yeah. And that's the one where, anyways, we're trying to get sidewalks on, and I'm trying to the community wants to narrow the streets 55 feet wide, and it's just a neighborhood street. Kids want to walk, kids want to ride their bikes, but people are going really fast because of how wide it is. And we know the studies have shown that width of a lane, width of the street impacts speeds. We know that. That's just a scientific fact. But so I would love to add that into the tool chest of traffic mitigation and speed mitigation in neighborhoods of of road narrowing to make it more safety. Lane width reduction, neck downs. I've never heard of chicane. That sounds great too, though. Let's add more to the toolbox. Oh, gosh. Roundabouts. Roundabouts is, we're getting some in my neighborhood because of a very large development is paying for them. But all the neighborhoods, especially older neighborhoods, should have that opportunity. So I'd love to see this get expanded, and especially relook at this program. We can make some more recommendations at a later date as well. Make some more recommendations to make it a bit more equitable for our communities. Getting 70% of residents, I'm glad it's not just homeowners, because that would be even more inequitable to our communities that have higher rental percentages, but still 70% seems too high. I don't know, is that number come from council? Is that number set by streets?
So as far as the history aspect, we can't say for certain what we've been able to find so far. We've looked at a lot of other cities locally and nationally, and oftentimes that 70 is fairly consistent throughout. Some vary here and there. So oftentimes these programs are built more by somebody creates a program and then other cities kind of follow along. Again, that's kind of speculation. I can't say for sure.
But I think it's time to innovate a bit on this and just learn from our experiences and comments like Amanda's. I would love to see that, for example, the allocating program that the city of Phoenix has 50%. So I think it's 50% plus one. That's usually how democracy works. That works well for that program. I'd love to see you go with that and not have kind of what I call the kind of heckler veto, where one person, like Amanda had recounted, and I've run into that before too. You have one person who says, I don't want it, and they're able to one person veto it. That impacts the whole community, impacts all these families. So love to see that change, and love to see the cost situation change, and definitely get more tools in the tool chest, because these neighborhoods are so diverse, and we just need more tools to do that. So I'm going to go with Tom and work my way down.
Yeah, I don't have a question. At the time speed humps originally were introduced, I would have to say there was not universal agreement that they were something that should be put into place, both at the council level and the street level, streets department level. And I would also say that at the time, many of us in the industry, myself included, I'm not innocent, were auto dominated. And anything that took away from the freedom of the automobile that paid for that street was viewed negatively. And some of that probably went into the selection process of these numbers, and these numbers get entrenched, as you say, and as Carl pointed out, we may have picked it up from another city, other cities may have picked it up from us. It probably wouldn't hurt to go back and look at those numbers. I don't know how you would come up with what number people think is fair. That's beyond my pay grade. But I can tell you that at the time that they were originally put in, there was mixed, it was very divisive at every level in the organization, and just food for thought. So I'll shut up there.
Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as the petition goes, I really like what Ed had to say about the equity part of it. I think in a lot of our communities, and especially in like South Phoenix, there's a lot of vacant land because of the displacement from the I-10 bypass and the Sky Harbor expansion. And so you have a lot of these houses and there's just empty lots near them, and you just have heavy trucks going through them. How would something like this occur? Like if they want to do a petition in those barrio communities and wanted to get speed humps in there, but they couldn't because no one lives there, how do you get a mailing address or reach out? So I think there's also some considerations to make it more equitable to those communities that don't have access to the property owner because it's just empty.
Yeah, this is, the program is currently stated, it's very much a kind of it's got a single family home in mind, and that was kind of some of the pictures we looked at. That's just not the reality in a lot of our communities, especially our communities that need traffic mitigation the most. Abby.
Well, my question kind of aligns with that too. Like, if an apartment was on that street, would every single resident of that apartment have to agree to the petition?
So our policy on apartments is we generally need a community manager or apartment manager, or someone that can more or less say, hey, I work, or owner can sign. If they're condos specifically, then it's the condos that generally front face the home, depending on the type of community and whatnot, and the condo and the lot size.
That's been a huge problem, you know, and I just know my neighborhood is one of those where there's apartments and there's single family homes and there's duplexes and there's a mix. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I certainly like it. And I think that's a cool part of Phoenix, having diversity, but it makes this process pretty much impossible, because trying to get a hold of, you know, absentee landlords, unregistered Airbnbs, you know, the manager of the pavilions, or, you know, people like that. This program's not set up for that, at least right now. There's not guidance for that, like written down guidance. There's too many impediments for communities that are more diverse communities. And any other thoughts or questions? So, I'd like to see us reform this a bit. Maybe expanding more tools in the tool chest is probably a big lift. I'd love to see us get there, but something I think we can do is, on the program itself, relook at this 100% requirement, and the 70% requirement, and this cost, you know, basis based on speed, and really bring an equity lens to the whole thing, and talking with communities that have been kind of disinvested, and how this process can fit those communities better. Okay, I'm gonna go to our public comments. Nicole, we got Nicole Rodriguez signed up for public comment on virtual.
Right, you guys could hear me?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Again, my opinions are my own. So one of the things I really want to emphasize on is what I heard Ed mention about the comparison to the alley abandonment program, where only 50% is required for signatures. That is something that really needs to be compared to with this program, with the traffic calming devices. Also, I mean, the catchphrase, I think I've heard several of y'all say tool chest and toolbox today. So one thing I'm going to recommend for committee members who don't already have access to NACDO Urban Street Design Guide. You get it, order online, it's a book, but as well you could get, I know, some of their information and content online, and chicanes are one of those toolbox mitigations, traffic mitigation aspects that I think even with streets, and I've had past conversations where chicanes could be leveraged more widely. And we also have obstacles and red tape where we're talking about stormwater runoff, and there's too much with that also we need to eliminate, because we have chicanes that are doing their job in mitigating traffic, but then we have streets playing not as an ally most of the time, but more of an obstacle for us, having chicanes where they eliminate stormwater runoff. With that too being said, one of the things I also heard was a comment made about the automobiles paying for the streets. That couldn't be further from the truth. The gas taxes have never come close to paying for streets. Nowhere close to even where that statement could have any validity. So streets are subsidized by us. And that's why even today, our streets department has a hard time having the funds to maintain streets, and we have to use bond money. So with that being said, it's too arduous of a process. We need to make it simpler for folks. And then I agree with all the comments that everyone has made from the committee, simplifying it, making it more accessible and easier. I mean, it comes down to us being able to have what is best for our safety, and having it accessible, but also having streets play an ally in that. And there's too many signatures are required. It's just, the simple word is, it's just stupid. So we need to really rethink this. With that, thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move on to, seeing nothing else, I'm gonna move on to requests for future agenda items. This is when, for our new members, this is when anyone on the committee gets to say, hey, I'd like to try to see if we can get something on the agenda for a future meeting. So.
Sarah had her
Agenda
her
items.
hand up, I think.
Did someone have their hand up? All right.
I think Sarah did.
Anyone, Jamie, future agenda item?
I kind of actually would like to talk more about the traffic mitigation program. I think that can be a productive way that we can communicate and figure out a good solution and give residents a tool to for their neighborhood. So I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, same here. And I should say thank you so much to Carl again, who is second meeting in a row, stepping in and really coming in and taking the hard questions and the difficult subjects. So really remiss in not saying thank you to Carl. That's a great suggestion. And other future agenda items?
Yeah, I'd like to get the discussion about the draft ordinance for hazardous obstructions in the bikeways on the agenda sometime soon. It's been over a year.
Got it, Dan. I was actually gonna bring that up if you didn't. That's related to hazardous obstructions, unlawful parking and blocking bike lanes, as I understand it, and other thoroughways. Right, Dan?
Yep, citizen reporting.
Citizen reporting. And I have one more, and there's a lot to talk about in October. We already talked about, so maybe this will be down the road further, but love to look at kind of what is done as a crash analysis practices by the streets department. You know, so there's a terrible or serious or deadly crash. What kind of crash analysis is happening? Not talking about, you know, police department going out there. Not talking about real, actual crash analysis.
Number crunching.
Well, that's number crunching, but looking at how on a specific person who's dead or people, what was a contributing factor from the design perspective, and what can be done to change that. Okay, seeing no other future agenda items, we're going to move on to public comment. And I'm going to start with folks who are here in the room, and then we're going to go to virtual. So here in the room and is Haley Ritter. Haley, come on up. We have a podium right over here, and hopefully a microphone. Oh yeah, yeah. Come on in next to Carl.
Is this one on? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we have several people signed up, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier on public comment. I do have 2 minutes, not to scare you at all. I'm going to give you a gentle little reminder at 2 minutes. To wrap up.
Okay. Okay, I thought I had to hold the button. My name is Haley Ritter, and I've been an activist for bicycle infrastructure, safe pedestrian crosswalks all over the city for the past 20 years or more. And I'm glad to meet you, Joe. I've heard a lot about you and your work in Manhattan, and I'm pleased to meet you officially. And I just want to say, I've been working as the Phoenix Connector representing the central city in mitigating traffic calming and stuff like that, and collected a lot of feedback from the community. And I just want to say that we had a lot of information about lots of tools regarding short-term versus long-term, low-cost versus high-cost projects, like, you know, hawk signals, stuff like that. There's a lot of very visual projects that are very affordable that can narrow traffic through intersections, like widening the sidewalks specifically at intersections. And I'd like to see a lot of that stuff discussed here among you guys in the traffic department. I'd like to know also, unfortunately, I don't have the results, the completed results of all that information, because they presented some of the intersections that we came up with as high risk and very specific areas within the central city, which is bound by McDowell Road down to Rio Salado and east and west between, I believe it's 24th Street to the 17th freeway, roughly. And South Mountain was also included in that. I was a representative in the central city, but I live in Alhambra, and that's the next phase that they're doing. They're working with a company called Alta Consultants, and we conducted a lot of those traffic study or surveys, from the public. And anyway, there's a lot of very quick fix, so to speak, projects. There's a lot of, what I've heard is that the city of Phoenix has a lot of those traffic barriers lying around, like those green poles that can be stuck up on bike lanes. I know that the one on Osborne is working very successfully for calming traffic in that neighborhood. I live right off of 23rd Avenue in Campbell. And so I live in the Westwood neighborhood. We used to have a lot of neighborhood meetings. We got cushions put on criminal attorney. So I'm wrapping up, but I just want to say, get to work. We got the T2050 money back in 14. So that was 10 years ago. Keep up the good work, but keep going with it. And thank you very much for hearing my passion and fury.
Thank you so much, Haley. I really appreciate being a connector and agree on those Osborne bike lanes. Those are wonderful. Next up, we have Timothy. Yeah, Timothy, you can come on up here. Probably easier.
Well, thank you so much. A little bit unrelated to the topic for this meeting, but I wanted to bring up a personal project I've been doing. I videoed 10 intersections around Phoenix and found out that a lot of the time, especially during rush hour, but also after rush hour, there would be this delay in which there'd be a red light, but no cars would be passing through the green intersection. And so I thought it would be really valuable to essentially shorten the entire cycle of traffic lights between the red and green by about 30 seconds. And based on a little bit of personal research and calculations, it would fit the speed limit a lot more, so you would hit much more consecutive green lights. It would also reduce a lot of issues that drivers have between impatience, because if you miss a red light, you're more likely to run it because you think you're going to have to wait a long time. By shortening these sort of intersection times, I think it would make the roads a lot safer. Cars produce a lot more pollution while they're waiting and idling rather than going through. And I think it would make traffic way more efficient. The funding is almost zero, because I think it should be pretty simple to sort of change and adjust the timing cycles around these intersections. A majority of these intersections, I report with data that I can email to anybody who wants it after. Essentially, all of the videos show that most of these intersections are sitting around 2 minutes or 150 seconds, but by shortening it by 30 seconds, it would make it way more efficient and way easier for a lot of drivers to pass through, and a lot safer of a manner. At the same time, it's also notable that even outside of rush hour, which is most of my studies, is even worse, because when there's less cars, but there's more volume from one sort of angle of the intersection, it means that the other intersection continues to pass through without much resolution for there, and that creates a lot more issues as well, because cars are just waiting at a red light without anyone else, and so it makes a lot more impatience, and it creates a lot more of these issues for a lot of this idle time. And I think this can also be applied. I didn't do as many studies on these intersections of turns, but I think it applies as well to a lot of left turns, especially those that aren't sort of yellow blinking lights or lights where you can turn through on, because those red lights especially are also very long in the cycle, and I think it'd be really great to consider this at the very least. Thank you so much for your answers tonight.
Thank you. Very, very exciting. I really appreciate the suggestion, Timothy. Moving on to our virtual folks, I'm going to start with Michelle Turner, who's with us virtually.
Okay.
Michelle, you there?
Hello. Yes, we are. I have 3 little kids. I have a 4-year-old and twin 1-year-old, so I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to express, or I guess share my experience. I actually spoke with the Speed Hump program. I spoke with Mike Vellotti just, I think it was 2 days ago, Monday or Tuesday. I just wanted to share our experience. We recently got 1 speed hump installed on a street perpendicular, and there's kind of 3 streets that come off of that street that also kind of get a lot of speeding. And so anyways, I called about those 3 streets. 2 of them, he informed me immediately that because of drainage, they would not be approved. And then the 3rd street is kind of unique in that it's a 1 lane, and it's between homes and a school. And so it's kind of the backside of the school and these homes. So it's about the width of an alley. And he actually couldn't answer at the time. He wasn't sure if it was publicly owned, if the school owned it, if it was partial. but kind of the main takeaway was he was like, are people even speeding there? And I said, sir, if I hadn't been almost hit twice with my children in the past 6 months alone, I wouldn't be wasting my time calling and talking to you. It's incredibly narrow and it has trees, and ideally that is supposed to slow down drivers. But when parents are motivated by school drop-off times, it doesn't cut it. And he said, well, if we can't do a speed hump, if we can't do a speed hump, there's nothing else to do. And I was like, is there any signage? And he said, no, we don't do any signage. And it was just kind of underwhelming. And so I appreciated some of the other thoughts that were shared in terms of expanding this toolbox and not having the speed hump program be a one size fits all for the city, which clearly has so many different sizes and types of streets. I would love to see something, there's types of painting that can be done to draw attention to an area. Chicanes, maybe like to further narrow the street, like make it so cars can barely squeeze through. But yeah, I guess, my main input was just that I'd like to see other solutions and not have the speed hump program be seen as like, this is it. This is how we handle traffic, traffic reduction. And so, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate the comments. Next, I'll go on to Gavin Lewis.
Really appreciated much of what others have shared tonight, and really I just want to echo my support for some of those things that have been said. Specifically, I think the suggestion of lowering the threshold from 100%, to 50% for a speed hump or similar traffic calming is a really excellent idea, and would make that barrier to entry a lot lower. I think kind of the feeling that I've gotten sometimes when thinking about these things and thinking about working through these processes for a road near our home, it's that these streets that we live on and live near, they were designed whoever knows how long ago, and we've inherited that, and yeah, it just feels like we should have more power to make the street what the neighborhood needs, as opposed to it being what it is designed how many ever decades ago. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Really appreciate your comments. Moving on to Sarah Monday. And if that's supposed to be a hard J, Sarah, apologies.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question or observation that I haven't noticed Department of Health Services or Public Health mentioned. That I noticed that this is a program being done by the Streets and Transportation, but reducing deaths and injuries is a public health issue. We know how to prevent deaths and injuries from other things in the world by monitoring. I wonder if all of the monitoring is through the police and how that might affect the accuracy of our monitoring when people don't feel comfortable calling the police to report something, or calling 911. We can prevent deaths and injuries like in a heavy-handed approach, or we can experiment, and things like detecting crashes are running experiments on people, and it means that somebody has to get hurt in order to count it. But we know like guaranteed ways that can stop people from getting killed, and we talk about the costs, but how are we determining the costs when we report them? The cost to whom? Are we talking about the costs involved when people die? Are those numbers going in reports? And what would it cost to close the street? What would it cost to not repair potholes to slow cars down. What if we had people who say no to traffic calming measures pay money to have somebody like police enforce the speed limit? And someone mentioned risky behavior and being open to more risk. Drinking is definitely a risky behavior, drinking and then driving. And what are we doing to reduce the number of people who decide to get drunk to solve their problems and then get in a car? What are some public health approaches, and what would those cost compared to the cost of lives? And how many of the emergency vehicles that need to get to crashes with a speed limit that's not too low, how many of them are actually driving to crashes? And how much could that problem fix itself if we had reduced the speed of the street in the first place?
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate your comments, and then I should have maybe mentioned this earlier because of open meeting law, we're not able to respond to any public comments, but I really appreciate it, and we oftentimes can address those comments in other ways or at future meetings. Moving on next to Stephen Elisala. Stephen.
Do you have it on mute?
I unmuted him.
Stephen, you there?
See if his on.
We'll come back. What we'll do, you might be fiddling around with it. We can come back to Stephen here in a minute. We will, while waiting for Stephen, we're going to go on to Nicole Rodriguez.
Thanks, Ed. I'll try to shoot Stephen a text too, but I'm Nicole Rodriguez with the Urban Phoenix Project. I'm really excited about the public comments today at the end, so I just wanted to share that with all the folks that are there in person and still online. It's really refreshing, and I hope this continues with this great public engagement. And I wanted to build upon some of those comments, and I couldn't decide at the moment, but a lot of truth to what Sarah was talking about on the cost of lives and the infrastructure that can go into mitigating and having actual impacts to saving those lives. Because we do know, as I mentioned earlier, that there is infrastructure out there that, yes, it may not be as quick as a camera that doesn't really necessarily save a life once it's been hit, and whether they're in a vehicle or biking or riding, but we do know there's infrastructure out there that we should also be talking about. And I mentioned one of those before, where over time it's actually less costly and saves exponentially more lives. So hopefully that appears on the agenda soon. A lot of this, once again, is reference in the NACDO guidelines, so hopefully we can peer more into that. And then I heard also reference to an issue that I've heard come up before and has come up to me personally with the traffic calming mitigation with stormwater blocking, with those speed humps and speed cushions blocking stormwater, and that couldn't be further from the truth also. So I'm sorry that Michelle had to deal with that, because speed humps and speed cushions, streets should not be telling people they impact drainage. They don't go into the curb and gutter. So hopefully she gets the needs that she has requested, and we've heard at the last meeting also from someone in Sunny Slope, and you could hear the frustration in having to work with streets on just even having the conversation of breaching the topic of getting the petition going. So but overall, I know Streets has a lot of capacity, or doesn't have a great amount of capacity. So looking at how that can streamline the program to make it easier, even on the Streets department, and just making it easier overall for everyone. And with that, Ed, thanks again. This was a great meeting, and I look forward to some of those future topics on the agenda that folks have been asking for some time. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to try to move on back to Steve. Steve, are you able to get back with us and be unmuted? It doesn't look like he is, but we'll.
Hold on, let me try again. I had him unmuted. There he goes.
Oh. We'll give a little bit. And Steve, if you're with us, pipe up. And if not, Our next meeting is on October 23rd, 2024. We'll be back at council chambers. And so we've got a lot of exciting things for our new members. We talk about a lot of exciting and sometimes nerdy things, and we really appreciate being a part of it and continuing to make our city safer to achieve our goal of 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries on our streets. No word from Steve, so Steve, we'll see you on October 23rd, 2024, like everybody else. Have a great evening, guys. We are adjourned.
Absolutely. Show you my